Governor Rauner and Speaker Madigan continue to blame each other for the budget impasse, and the cuts keep coming. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Yes, the impasse goes on, and a couple of people who watch such things closely to perhaps, I don't know if they'll give us hope, but at least insight. Charlie Wheeler is back. He is Director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at University of Illinois, Springfield, training graduate students to go into our fine profession, and a former Chicago Sun-Times State House Bureau reporter. Charlie, welcome back.
Thank you. It's always good to be here.
And Dave Dahl, who is perhaps the hardest working man in radio in Springfield. He is State House reporter for Illinois Radio Network, which has stations across the state, and morning news anchor WTAX in Springfield. Welcome back, Dave.
Thank you, Bernie.
So, Governor Rauner was in, I believe it's Oak Lawn this week, and after many appearances at various parts of the state where he says no more media availability on his schedule, he was available and he read a speech, 15 or 20 minutes, basically saying it's time for Democrats to act because we're waiting too long. It hurts me terribly that these problems with the budget are there, and you just need to agree to my reforms and we can go forward.
Reading a speech doesn't count as an availability, Bernie, and you know it.
Okay, he did, I guess, Jim Durkin, the Republican leader of the House, answered questions after the governor left. But yes, the governor didn't take questions, but he did at least make himself available on camera. I understand your point. Charlie.
Well, I hate to break this news to the governor, but the election was 11 months ago, and he won. So it's time for him, in my judgment, to stop campaigning and start governing. And the fact that he has not met, as best as we can tell, with the Democratic leaders since last spring, I think is outrageous. Now he can say, he can blame them, pick up the phone and call them to your office. And by the same token, the Democratic leaders should pick up the phone and say, Governor, come on down and sit with us on the floor of the chamber to try and work this stuff out. But it's like everybody's calcified in their position. And the governor says, well, I'd be happy to negotiate as soon as you accept my list of demands. And the Democrats say...
Well, he says his demands have been diminished over time. He's no longer for right-to-work zones, but he still wants the problem term limits and remap reform and property tax
explain to me how term limits affects the budget situation.
I understand your point.
Particularly if you read the legislation, and the bill says that it would take effect, it takes effect in January of 2017, and it says service before the second Wednesday in January of 2017 shall not be considered. And it gives you a 10-year time of service in the House and the Senate. So as a practical matter, it doesn't become effective until January of 2027. Explain to me how that impacts the budget of fiscal year 2016.
Dave, weigh in.
We've been spending 2 years and more trying to figure out what Bruce Rauner is all about. And I ask the two of you, what do you think he really wants?
Well, I think I know he thinks, because he has said so, that government union bosses have an unfair deal because they negotiate for their members and help after helping people get elected. So he thinks that it's a bad thing. I know that one of his role models was Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin, who was able, with a Republican legislature, to erode the right of people to collectively bargain in the public sector. There's a lot less of that now. People are able to opt out. I think the teachers' unions up there lost many, many members. And I think that the governor views these reforms, even including term limits that won't take effect for more than 10 years, as indications to the business community that we are a friendly place so that you can bring your businesses here, open new factories and other things. That's what he wants to do. I mean, Scott Walker, however, had a Republican legislature. Bruce Rauner got elected by everyone, but has a Democratic legislature to deal with, and now we're stuck 4 months into the new budget year with no budget.
So you really think, as I sit here thinking, what's that governor all about? You think he's about diminishing the influence the unions you discussed has been done in Wisconsin?
Well, he has said that many times. So we have to take him at the words we hear.
I think the bottom line is that he, for philosophical reasons, really believes that public employee unions are wrong, that they're harmful to the state. And he thinks that unionized labor in general is bad because workers are able to bargain collectively.
He says he likes union members. And
Right.
and
Just
isn't
as long as
against
they don't-
unions.
Just as long as they don't belong to the union, and as long as they don't bargain collectively and force employers to pay more money in wages and benefits than they otherwise would have to. So I think it's the mentality that unions are bad because they prohibit the people who run the businesses from making the best bottom line decisions. They have to pay somebody more than they would otherwise because he belongs to a union, that kind of stuff. I think that's where he's coming from. And I think that that is an alien concept for Republican governors in Illinois, at least the Republican governors that I've watched since the days of Richard Ogilvie. That includes Jim Thompson, includes Jim Egger, includes George Ryan. None of them were anti-union in the same way that our current governor is.
And I guess the question is, where is Illinois? Because the governor, it was just reported this last week, with new campaign finance reports coming out, has $19 million in his own campaign fund. There's an associated campaign fund that is working with friends of his that has several more millions of dollars. Can they mount an advertising campaign or whatever, or election battles over time that can tilt the balance to get the more Democratic members, or to convince the public in what has been a trending Democratic state with a strong union kind of history, that it's the right thing to be more like Wisconsin?
I think the problem that the Republicans face starts with the fact that the Republican brand nationally has little to appeal to minorities and Hispanics. You hear some of these right-wing goofs like Donald Trump talking about taking people, deporting them, put up a huge fence. At one point, Scott Walker entertained putting a fence up between the northern boundary of the U.S. and Canada.
Well, that's before he dropped out of the presidential race.
And so this does not appeal to Hispanic voters. Hispanics are the fastest growing population demographic in the state of Illinois. Illinois was able to elect Democratic senators from districts rooted in counties that had never elected a Democrat to the senator before, largely on the basis of Hispanic populations in those areas and the fact that the Democrats got to draw the map. Now the election in 2016 is not going to change the balance so that suddenly Bruce Rauner gets a Republican majority in the General Assembly like Scott Walker had in Wisconsin.
Right. Yeah, the majorities are too big. They might lose veto-proof majorities, which they're not even able to use right now in the House.
As we sit here right now, there is no veto-proof majority in the House because there's a vacancy. Representative Golar passed away, God rest her, and the committeemen in her area have yet to appoint a replacement.
Numerically, a numeric supermajority.
Well,
Right.
what I'm saying is the Democrats don't have the numeric supermajority. They have, at the moment, they have 70 members in the House.
I understand.
And those members aren't, despite the governor's rhetoric, Mike Madigan doesn't pull everybody's strings.
Yeah. Speaking of Mike Madigan, he put out a statement in response to Bruce Rauner's address, basically saying that the governor should act, reasonably, as he has always said, and that should not concentrate on what he called issues that would result in lower wages and a lower standard of living for middle-class families. This, again, is if you allow local governments like the governor wants not to collectively bargain with their employees, if you allow health insurance not to be something that public employees can collectively bargain on, which was one specific point the governor made in that speech. Madigan says that erodes the middle class's wages and benefits that they have come to be used to, which are part of the unionization of Illinois. Does Madigan win the day? Madigan has been certainly, that other paper in Chicago, the Tribune, they've certainly spent a lot of time on their editorial page demonizing Madigan with a lot of bad cartoons and such.
Yeah.
Win the day.
Well, I mean, will the public end up looking at the damage being done by not having a budget and say, yes, Bruce Rauner, you were right, let's go with you, or hang tough Democrats, or will anybody?
I think it depends on who it is. It depends on how effective you are. If you're people in Bruce Rauner's circle, no, not having a budget, there's no effect on you. On the other hand, if you're a single mom who suddenly no longer has access to child care and you're in the position of, what do I do? Do I give up my job? Do I only work part-time? Do I have to find some unlicensed childcare? Do I leave my kid at home? Or do I just go back on the welfare rolls? Those are the kind of decisions that the folks Bruce Rauner runs around with don't face on a daily basis. Now, I think the strategists in the governor's office hope that those are the kind of issues that resound in areas where legislators can vote the, quote, turnaround agenda out of desperation because their constituents are being held hostage.
Dave, there was a hearing in Springfield this week. I don't know if you attended or not, but the Department of Human Services was...
I'm afraid I was there.
Okay, that was?
I was there.
Okay, and it involved people talking about the new regulations put on by the Rauner administration for like qualification for child care. And as I read our own Doug Finke's story, the situation is that if you're a single parent with one child, it used to be you could make $2,400 a month and qualify for some aid for your child care. Under these new rules that are being implemented by this administration, basically to save money, I guess, if you make more than $600 per month, then you're not eligible for child care. So I guess if you can make less than minimum wage and not qualify.
One of our vocabulary words for 2015 has been CCAP, Child Care Assistance Program. We're hearing a lot about that. We're hearing that word a lot. This would be essentially a third-party program where the various child care providers take in children whose parents are either going to school or working at fairly low-wage jobs or both. And I see the CCAP program as one that keeps the wheel moving. If you don't qualify for CCAP, then you're probably not going to have as many hours available to you for work or school, and thus you'll not be bettering yourself, you'll not be improving yourself, you're probably going to stay on welfare. And if you're running a child care provider, maybe you're not going to be in business much longer. And what about the kids?
Let me be a devil's advocate. Go ahead, Charlie.
But the CCAP is an important part of the welfare to work reforms that were enacted 20 years ago with broad bipartisan support. When AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, was phased out on the national level, replaced with a program called TANF, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, part of the deal was you could only collect welfare benefits for 24 months in a row or for 60 months in your lifetime. But to help people on welfare move into the workforce, the states, including Illinois, enacted programs like CCAP to say, well, you want to work, but you have nobody to take care of your kids, and daycare is expensive. We'll help pay for daycare. And it was a Republican initiative. Jim Edgar got it going. George Ryan supported it. They expanded it to enable more people to move off welfare and into the workforce. And what the governor's doing is reversing those 20 years of progress and putting it in a place where a single mom has to choose between taking care of her kids or working.
Let me be a devil's advocate just to say one of the comments I saw online under a story about this. Well, don't these people have families or friends that can take care of their kids?
Well, not everybody does. I mean, not everybody lives in the 50s sitcom type world where there's mom and dad and these charming 3 little kids and there's grandma and grandpa. Not everybody lives in that world.
And CCAP's not necessarily free to those parents. If grandma can take care of them, or maybe they ought to call you, maybe Bernie can take care of them. Maybe
You've
if
got
grandma,
a good case.
If grandma can take care of them, grandma's probably not going to charge. And CCAP is going to charge, and the mom or dad in the CCAP scenario is paying some amount of money.
Let's get into another bit of collateral damage. Someone who runs the Illinois Public Health Association put out some sort of statement or report, was on the media this week talking about 16 of 97 health departments across the state that are run by counties have cut hours or staff. And I did hear a radio discussion of this where she was saying that especially in some smaller counties they might have to close soon without more state funding on the way. So I guess when people look at the state government and say, where does it end? Where does it end? When will collateral damage end? We closed the state museum in Springfield while the union employees are still there. And they did fire or let go of the top staff who were non-union, but people are showing up. But the governor says we have a fiscal crisis. We can't open this to the public right now.
Do you think the governor gives a tinker's damn about any of this?
I can't look into a person's head, Dave, so I'm not sure.
The CCAP parents and children the people who...
He says he does. He says he's outraged at these cuts to health care and to families.
Well,
I mean, he says that.
I would say that he ought to walk the walk then and not just talk the talk. He is the governor. He sounds like some helpless victim. Oh, I can't do anything because Mike Madigan is, thwarting me.
Oh, no!
That's malarkey. As I said before, you ought to call him to his office and say, look, I'll get off my hatred for unions, and you give me something on workers' compensation, on unemployment insurance, on tort reform. We'll work out some kind of a property tax freeze, and then we'll work on the budget. I already said that I believe that we need more revenue.
Yeah, well, he has said to the Democrats, just pass the tax increase. I won't like it, and you can just override me. Of course, they don't have the votes to override.
No,
is
they
that,
don't have the votes to
an
override.
unrealistic thing?
Well, you could turn around and say, well, Governor, you want your turnaround agenda. You have the Republicans in the General Assembly pass all this anti-union stuff. He doesn't have the votes for that either.
Correct.
And not all Republicans, if push came to shove, would feel comfortable voting for some of this radical stuff that the governor wants. There are a lot of Republicans, particularly downstate, who have a lot of union members, Republicans, in their district, and those union members don't want to see their collective bargaining rights stripped away.
I understand what you say about Republicans, may not all vote for this and have certainly union stuff, but the Republican legislators have seemed to stay pretty close with the governor so far. They haven't come off the dime, even into the fourth month. And I'll say this, Jim Durkin, the Republican leader of the House, was interviewed by one of former Sun-Times person, Natasha Korecki up in Chicago, who's now with Politico. And Jim Durkin said that the Democrats are using these vulnerable citizens who are losing their programs as human shields. Of course, in response to this, by saying, because they could, pass their budget or agree to what the governor wants, or some of it. Of course, then Steve Brown, spokesman for Speaker Madigan, said to Natasha, sounds like Durkin was a human shield when Rauner went running out the door after the speech like a scared second grader, which I'm not sure.
Yeah,
if
and see, that kind of
process.
rhetoric doesn't
so
help
that's
the
from
situation
Steve
at all.
So where does this all get us? I mean, but I'm saying the Republicans, people have basically taken what the governor wants and voted that way, at least not breaking ranks. So like several in central Illinois on a big question of if the AFSCME contract should go to arbitration, which the governor strongly opposed. The Republicans representing a lot of state employees who live in central Illinois voted present because they did not vote.
Who voted to override.
Well, in the Senate,
yeah.
That's right, Sam McCann, state senator. So they're kind of sticking with their man.
Well, not to be cynical about it, but I think you mentioned 19 million reasons why a little earlier, right? He's got this huge kitty, largely funded by his wealthy friends, and he's said, I'm going to use this to reward my friends and punish my enemies. So if I'm a Republican and I'm sitting there and I'm worried there's these millions of dollars that can be used to promote a challenger to me in the primary, I'm not going to do anything to buck the governor at this point. Now, maybe once the filing period is over, I might be willing to buck the governor, figuring, okay, he's not going to support the Democrat against me, and I don't have to worry about opposition in the Republican primary.
And Leach is on his way out, and so is Moffitt. It was in just, I believe, Thursday's
a couple of
paper.
state representatives from
David Leach from Peoria.
Don Moffitt of Gilson, is it?
Yes,
Up in
and up by
northern Illinois.
Galesburg. And I'm kind of wondering about the long-rumored administrative position for Moffitt. I don't know what's happening with that. It sounded like something was going to come together, and it never did. He stayed in the legislature, and now he's going to be leaving. David Leach, a rare bird, being a Republican who has a reputation for doing a lot in social services. He's represented the Peoria area for a long time.
Former reporter for the Peoria Journal-Star.
Right. Yeah, well, let's get a little perspective from Charlie, who has the ultimate in perspective around here. But isn't it normal for several normal for several legislators to leave? I mean, we are seeing people retiring or announcing that they're not coming back. Do you see a trend that it's more this year than other times? Because everybody who's not running again, everybody says, "Oh, they're scared of the governor." You think that's what it is, or is it just time for some people?
I think it's all up to the individual. People have been here a long time and remember what it was like back in the days when we had a more involved governor, a more functioning legislature, an ability to sit down and work out problems. They're maybe longing for the good old days, And after being here for a while, they might think to themselves, do I want to put up with this nonsense anymore? Or it could be on their own personal schedule. They've said to themselves, when I reach this stage, I'm going to retire so I can spend more time with my grandkids. I don't think you can make a blanket statement about it.
Right.
I would guess, though, that people who are on the on the edge, not sure which way they want to go.
On Scott Walker's fence. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
Or Donald Trump's fence.
Yeah, that the environment, which has become a lot more, from my perspective, polluted in terms of compromise getting things done than it was when I was a reporter 20 years ago, that's certainly not an incentive to make people want to hang around.
There may not be the cause and effect there, but I agree with everybody on this panel that even though there may not be cause and effect, this is the first year of the Rauner administration. There are people leaving, whether some are saying this would be a good time because of that. There's some of it, but it is interesting to see.
Okay, well, let's shift gears and do a kind of a state and federal thing, because Dave, I know that you've been in communication. I also spoke with him briefly. State Senator Kyle McCarter of Lebanon, Illinois. He's in the middle of a 4-year term, so he can run for something else in 2016 without putting his state Senate seat in jeopardy, but he has announced this last week that he is going to run in the 15th Congressional District, which is mostly southern and southeastern Illinois now. John Shimkus is the senator who is going on 20 years, even though he had said he would term limit himself to 12, but then changed his mind when people, including George W. Bush, prevailed upon him to stay and help the Republican
Made
caucus.
him realize how indispensable he was to the people
Absolutely.
of his district.
And he used to represent Springfield, and in redistricting the last time, he represents a more southerly district. But so what's the situation with that? We've got a Republican taking on another Republican in a year where perhaps, does that help the party, hurt the party?
I don't know about that, but it certainly will put John Shimkus maybe to some more accountability than he's used to, and I don't say that as a pejorative. But when you have someone like that, time after time after time, no opposition, is it because
he's had some, but it hasn't been strong in a number of years.
It's kind of been nominal.
Yeah.
Is it because John Shimkus is just so awesome? We'll see. And with regard to Kyle McCarter, he's maybe not a politician out of central casting in terms of the glad handing. He's got a reputation as being kind of a, I don't want to say skunk at the picnic, but he hasn't supported Leader Radonio for the most part. He has challenged her, and he's kind of not been real quick to make friends in his own caucus.
He's a strong conservative, and
he's a
business owner. I think he owns a manufacturing company or two.
I asked him about that, and he said, with regard to being in the Tea Party, he said, I don't necessarily consider myself a Tea Partier. I think I'm for everybody. I'm for everybody who thinks it's time for John Shimkus to go. I don't know if he's walking a little bit to the middle, but in my opinion, if you're on the extreme right or the extreme left, you're leaving a lot of people behind, or they're leaving you behind, because I think much of the world is, it could be, I'm mellowing, but it could be that I see the world as kind of gray. I don't think that many people really, in the real world, are far, far right, far, far left. McCarter's going to get a lot of windshield time. He's going to get to know Danville, which is the largest city that is not broken up in that district that he wants to represent. And he lives in Lebanon. He's going to move to Effingham, so he'll be living in the district. He lives in the Mike Bost district now. Of course, these districts belong to the people, but it's represented by Mike Bost.
And he only lives, he said, about a mile from the county line, which I think meant a mile.
In fact, if you're running for Congress,
you can live anywhere in Illinois legally.
Yeah, I could
it's a political problem.
I could run for Congress in that district if I wanted to.
Or in Chicago.
And I said, why this district and not the one represented by Bost, not the one represented by Rodney Davis? Because that would also be a short move. He said he thinks it's time for John Shimkus to go, and he wants to tell the people of the 15th District that.
Well, it'll be perhaps an interesting thing. I will say that our colleague Tom Kasich of the News-Gazette and Champaign reported that Governor Rauner's spokesman said that he is for John Shimkus because John Shimkus is for the turnaround agenda. I will say that's interesting because Shimkus, part of the turnaround agenda is term limits, and Shimkus is the person who reneged on his own personal term limit. And Kyle McCarter is a sponsor, I believe, of Governor Rauner's term limit proposal in the legislature. So these are odd things. A little inside baseball here, perhaps, but the U.S. Supreme Court did act in the last week, turning down taking a case from a lower court in which reporters for the Illinois News Network, which is the name that the Illinois Policy Institute has given its news-generating organization. They have a couple of print reporters and a radio reporter who's also on a station in Springfield separately on his other time. The House and Senate denied press passes for these people on the floor, so that they can't come in the press box on the floor right next to the legislators. And Scott Reeder, the editor of this group, who's part of the Illinois Policy Institute, which he says in his columns, they sued, and again, courts said no, there's immunity for the legislature from such lawsuits because they can pick who's in their press box, and their rules say no lobbying organizations. It was the immunity thing that got it through. Charlie, your thoughts on this? Are the House and Senate correct in this?
Yeah, I think they are, because the bottom line is the Illinois Policy Institute is not like the State Journal Register. It's not like the Illinois Radio Network. It's not like the Sun-Times. It's not out there to gather and report the news so that its constituents have a better idea what's going on. Instead, it has a very definite agenda. It bills itself as a free market, liberty-based lobbying organization and research.
Well, they don't say lobbying anymore because they formed a separate Illinois Policy Action to do the lobbying.
And the court said, yeah, it's the same thing. So,
well, that's what the House and Senate people
I
said.
would argue that
You just said a bunch of euphemisms for right wing, by the way. It's a right wing group.
Okay.
Well,
thank you, Dave.
But they have no more right to be in the press box as members of the press than, say, the Illinois State Medical Society would, or the AFL-CIO. They put out newsletters. They've never tried to get their writers to be considered part of the press corps.
Yeah, and I have repeatedly said in the column that they shouldn't be calling their news arm Illinois News Network, because it sounds like Illinois Radio Network, which is real media.
Yeah.
Anybody with a smartphone and a YouTube account or a Facebook account can call themselves a journalist, and it's the whole discussion I find fascinating.
And the problem is that small newspapers in particular and radio stations take this stuff because they are offered it free, and they run that content because they don't have to pay for it. And some of their reporting actually, looks balanced and it's fine, but a lot of it, they're not going to say a lot great about Illinois because that doesn't fit kind of what the Institute is pushing, that we have all these problems. Okay, I talked about inside baseball. How about outside baseball? Chicago Cubs versus Cardinals. Going to be in a postseason playoff. People are going wild in Chicago. I'm sure in Springfield, which is about 2/3 Cardinals versus 1/3 Cubs. Where are we going with this, people? Is this going to divert anyone from the budget problems?
That I don't know. I think it may be a welcome diversion, but it'll be interesting. The two teams in the regular season, and I think I read this somewhere online, have played something like, I want to say 2,300 games. I could be wrong in the number. They've never played each other in the postseason. This
Is
will
that
be the
right?
First time. Yeah.
Well, it's going to be hotly watched around here, I know that. With that, it's time for us to perhaps go watch that. Anyway, Charlie Wheeler, thank you. Dave Dahl.
Or listen to it.
Or listen to it. Radio we
right.
love. Or Dave Dahl, thank you. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.